All right. And now I have the very distinct pleasure of introducing our next speaker. And that next speaker is Cheri Merz. Cheri and I met about maybe a little bit over a year ago. And we met over a common love of reading and of writing. I think Cheri is actually one of the few people I know who possibly might read more than I do. I read 100 and I'm not little over 100 books last year. I'm about halfway to reading 100 more books this year. And I know Cheri loves reading as much as I do. And she brings not only that love of reading from a spectator position, but she has also, and this I am only following far behind in her footsteps, she has also written 30 indie published books and a memoir. She now helps authors find their voice and publish those works in order to make a greater impact in the world. I've had the pleasure of participating in some of Cheri's trainings. In fact, my writing I've been writing every day for the last 8+ years and have written 2.3 million words, but most of that was for my eyes only. And Cheri helped me to start writing again so that other people can read what I have written. And I am slowly getting to the process where I will be publishing a book soon entitled Arrived, How Facing the Darkness Inspired Me to Shine. And I will definitely give a very prominent place in that book and the acknowledgments to Cheri for helping me bridge the gap from just dreaming of writing to actually writing. So let us welcome Cheri Merz as our next presenter. Welcome, Cheri.
Thank you, Steve. I am a little intimidated by the people who have gone before me. I don't know how to follow those acts, but there was something I wanted to say before I started my presentation, and I have forgotten what it is, so I'll have to say it later, I guess. Oh, one thing I wanted to say was I bought the microphone I'm using today so that I could sing karaoke on Zoom at a Christmas party last year. And I loved your presentation, Dawn. That was so much fun. Okay, Steve, am I able to share my screen?
You are now.
Okay. And if I'm doing it right, you will see only the part of the presentation that I want you to. Let's see if this works. Okay, can you see one slide or everything on PowerPoint?
Everything on PowerPoint currently.
Darn. Hang on, because I've got notes in here. Let me stop my share and try this one more time. I apologize. So while I'm doing this,
I think you can start presentation and then it'll show one slide at a time.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Olivia?
You can start presentation and then swap presenter mode, and that will show one slide at a time.
Yes, I know. That isn't what I need to do, though. I have lost my share screen button. Here it is. It's supposed to show me how to share just a portion of my screen. Maybe I have to set that up first. Oh, well. We'll just wing it. Here it is. Now, can you see just one slide? Okay.
Yes.
So apologies, Steve, you're going to have to edit this part of the video. So Steve asked me to talk about perfect timing and unlimited opportunity. The reason he did that, I believe, is because he knows that my heart song was, shall we say, suppressed for about 50 years. And I'm also going to talk about why now is the best time ever to sing your heart song. So they say that the perfect time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And the next best time is now. Of course, if you didn't plant one 20 years ago or anytime since, you have to hope that someone else did. So what does this have to do with singing your heart song or writing your book, which is my version of singing my heart song, besides the karaoke I sing when I have the opportunity? Well, I didn't write a book 20 years ago, nor even when I first wanted to 50 years ago. But that may not be all bad. And I'm going to talk about why I believe that. While the perfect time to write and self-publish your book online may have been almost 20 years ago, there's still unlimited opportunity to do so now, and maybe even more so. So with your indulgence, we'll start with a little bit of a history lesson. Human beings have been telling stories ever since we developed language. At first, it may have been a way to tell of hunting or other exploits. I did a little research for this talk and looking to see if when human beings developed language was similar to or about the same time as the oldest petroglyphs like these in the picture were created. And some people say the petroglyphs were created about 27,000 years ago, the oldest ones. Others say they were almost simultaneous with the development of language, which was about 50,000 years ago. So whether it's 27,000 when a form of writing developed or 50,000, it's a long, long time ago. So stories have been with us since the dawn of time. Now, I have a theory that as self-awareness developed and evolved, stories may have been a way to understand the world around us and account for events we couldn't explain, like erupting volcanoes. I think human beings thought that some mysterious force must be causing these things, like erupting volcanoes or the sun being eclipsed by what horrible monster. And I think mythological beings began to populate those stories as we developed our own awareness of our own tiny place in the universe and began to worship these mythological creatures who ruled our existence and must be appeased to remain favorable toward us. I believe our heart songs began as this awareness. This is a lot of words on this slide, so let me just try to summarize them. The most satisfactory forms of our storytelling today owe their structure to the ancient stories. Steve talked about reading 100 plus books last year. I believe my count was 120. We weren't too far apart. This year, I set my goal as 100, but I ran into Christopher Booker's book, The 7 Basic Plots. It's 700 plus pages in a tiny, tiny font. I would be willing to bet there are probably, I don't do math in my head, but let's say 500,000 words in that book. and it's very dense reading. But what he brings out in that book is that from ancient times to the present, we tell the same stories over and over again, and that those stories are almost always at the very, very core of them. They are about the balance between good and evil. Today, we seek to inspire, inform, entertain, and make sense of our inner lives in the stories we tell and how we choose to tell them. And there's never been a better time in terms of opportunity to tell them in our own authentic voices. Now, let me stop the share so that I can talk to you face to face and talk a little bit about my story. It's no secret that I'm a proponent of self-publishing. I'd like to tell you my own story for a few minutes because of that. And then if you can stand a little more history, I'll explore how and why we should never have discounted self-publishing as a legitimate way to publish and why it may be your best way to publish now. So as the oldest child in a family that treasured reading for pleasure, I learned to read by the time I was 5 years old. I can recall trips to the library when I was 8. My father had started an independent auto body repair business as an early entrepreneur. This was in the 50s, by the way. Don, was it, who said that was when dinosaurs were tracking the earth? I was 8 years old at that time, and my mother had gone to work as my father's receptionist. So my younger brother and baby sister and I were stuck in a tiny little room with a naugahyde couch and a concrete floor. But it didn't matter to me because I had books. I had books to read. And I was content because that room disappeared for me while I was deep in the story of the book. It was also that year, later that year at Christmas, when I was given my first grown-up book for Christmas. That book, Little Women, led to reading becoming my obsession ever since. By the time I was 15, I knew my life's calling was writing stories, like Jo in Little Women. But that was not to happen until decades later. I've talked before about how, as a teen who already had a pretty good case of imposter syndrome going, I let a stupid comment from a mail order writing course coach crush my dream of writing fiction. As an adult, I would have pushed back, but as a 15-year-old, I didn't know I could. This was in the mid-60s, and the reason that's important is there was no self-publishing as we know it today. What that uninformed comment meant to me was that I was not and would not ever be good enough to get a traditional publishing contract. So I let that dream go. And I let that be my truth until 2011. So I want you to remember that date because it will play a significant part in the rest of my story and in the unlimited opportunity part of this presentation. So we are about to take a very high-level view of the history of publishing. But since you're not here for a history lesson, I've left a lot out and touched on only the parts that speak to perfect timing and unlimited opportunity. So I'll go back to my slideshow again. Hopefully I'm doing it right this time. I'm not gonna stop if I'm not. So books replaced carved stone tablets, animal skin scrolls, and other primitive media sometime in the, well, not medieval, before that. I meant to look that date up. Eventually, they became works of art. They were hand-printed and illuminated and available to be read only by clerics and the ultra-wealthy. That's because those were the only people who could read. But, oops, I skipped one. Printing presses were invented independently in China and elsewhere, but they weren't capable of mass printing books until 1452, when Gutenberg invented movable type and the publishing industry was born. But self-publishing has its origins far earlier than most people are aware. Did you know that Benjamin Franklin built his own press so he could self-publish his annual Poor Richard's Almanac? That happened in 1732. People we now respect greatly, like Jane Austen, also self-published. Her first novel, originally titled Susan, was sold to a publisher, but that publisher never printed it. So in 1811, she resorted to using a vanity press, something we highly disrespect now, but she used that to publish Sense and Sensibility. Even then, publishers were beginning to act as gatekeepers to suppress people's heart songs, deciding what was worthy of publication according to their own standards, which did not necessarily consider what readers would enjoy. So just a few more. In 1855, Walt Whitman self-published Leaves of Grass. Marcel Proust self-published Remembrance of Things Past in 1913. But by that time, the great publishing houses that have since become known variously as the Big Six, the Big Five, and in general as traditional publishers, had begun to establish themselves as the arbiters of good versus inferior writing, despite the blunders that led Austen and her fellow authors to resort to self-publishing. So from 1917 through 1946, a few other people got into the act. Some authors established publishing houses to self-publish their own work, and that was to do it without the stigma of the phrase, because by mid-century, self-published meant you weren't good enough, just like I thought. Many of these companies also joined the ranks of traditional publishers. As the general public became more widely literate and more people had leisure to pursue entertainment, a growing demand for reading material materialized. But the expenses of producing a book on speculation meant the publishing houses had to develop ways to mitigate the risk. So that was when vanity presses and self-publishing became dirty words among traditionally published authors, and the stigma lasted for more than 4 decades. However, something was brewing that was to eventually turn the institution of publishing on its head. And I'll go rather quickly through these slides because I don't want you to fall asleep. So the invention of the World Wide Web allowed what had previously been the playground of computer programmers, government laboratories, and universities to be accessible by the public. I was around as an IT person in the bad old DOS days, well before the World Wide Web. When I first heard about the World Wide Web, it was amazing to me that people could now access it in plain language rather than computer language. With the advent of print on demand, which began even before in 1960s, and fully available from large companies we could find online, it leveled the playing field for self-publishers. Previously, a self-published author would have to purchase at least 100 and usually more than 1,000 books, and it was prohibitive for most. But the juxtaposition of these two things created the first blog to book, which was, and if you saw the movie, this was wonderful. This was Julie Powell's blog about her attempt to produce all 524 recipes in Julia Child's Mastering the Art of French Cooking in only 365 days. And it was so popular that Powell was able to sign a book deal with a traditional publisher. It was published in 2005. Guess who else decided to self-publish? You'll never believe it. I didn't when I was doing the research for this. Stephen King became the first major author to self-publish online in 2006. And in his ads, he stated, "My friends, we have a chance to become big publishing's worst nightmare." That was after a disappointing experience with his first ebook, which was Riding the Bullet. It was the first mass market ebook, and it was before Amazon and Kindle. And it wasn't a terribly successful experiment. Neither was his first self-publishing experiment. That was eventually a failure, and Mr. King went back to traditional publishing. But many authors who had previously only published traditionally have weighed the pros and cons, and they've turned either to exclusively self-publishing or finishing out their contracts as hybrid authors. They cite such reasons as creative control and speed to market as the reasons. We're getting to why this is the best opportunity. Crowdfunding became possible, which allowed authors to finance production of their self-published books to a higher degree of professionalism than any but the most well-off had been able to do before. And then e-readers came along, and two distributors, Smashwords and BookBaby, in 2011, the era of unlimited opportunity was launched. Now, I asked you to remember that date, and it wasn't only because of the e-readers. It was in 2011 that E.L. James published the first of her Twilight fanfic trilogy, 50 Shades of Grey, to wild popular acclaim and universal revulsion from critics and publishers and, might I say, readers of better literature. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and how it affected me. So Scott Pack, a former head buyer for Waterstones and publisher for HarperCollins, and who now runs the Aardvark Bureau imprint, later said this about 50 Shades. I'm going to have to read this, it's long. The runaway success of 50 Shades had forced the entire publishing industry to reevaluate assumptions of what makes books sell. For years, centuries even, the publishing industry and literary world's definition of good was the only one that mattered. If we didn't think something was good, it didn't get agented, it didn't get published. Bookshops didn't stock it, and it didn't sell. There was almost no opportunity to sing your heart song during those centuries. But Pack went on to say, for us, good is often linked to literary style, what we consider the quality of writing, and so on. What 50 Shades, and more widely the whole self-publishing phenomenon of the last 4 or 5 years has proved is that readers can have a completely different definition of good. You think that definition might be that the story resonates with them, that your heart song harmonizes with theirs? I don't mean to indicate that as authors we have the indulgence to put out writing that isn't up to our own best work. However, we do have the approval now of readers, to sing our heart songs and publish what is truth and passion for ourselves. Readers who resonate with us will appreciate our books, even if a traditional publisher wouldn't find them commercial enough to publish. And that, my friends, means unlimited opportunity. So here's the rest of my story. In 2012, I interviewed my daughter about her perspective on experiences she had growing up with an undiagnosed case of fibromyalgia. It was a heartrending interview for me. I had failed my daughter utterly in supporting her in her invisible illness. I didn't understand it. We didn't talk then about, or when she first got it, which was before it was even named, when she was 5 years old. We didn't talk then about invisible illnesses because we didn't know about them. It was only when the internet gave us our voices that we began to understand them. It was a sort of memoir. We published her memories against mine. And I punctuated it with my conclusions based on a little research that I didn't even know how to cite, despite my then 43-year-old English degree. We both went over it, but reading it now with my editor hat on embarrasses me. Nevertheless, we haven't fixed it because it was our heart song. It was a way to achieve catharsis and forgiveness for what I now understand to be my failures in supporting her. Later that year, I met the first of my ghostwriting clients. At first, I edited and then wrote a series of books for him that explored natural ways to manage chronic illnesses. Obviously, we had a common interest there. We continued that off and on until a round of radiation therapy for breast cancer surgery robbed me of energy. And while I was resting after my daily treatments, I picked up 50 Shades because everyone was talking about it and raving about it. I was appalled. At the time, I didn't think of writing fiction. I considered my voice to be too formal for genre fiction. But my client had other ideas. He more or less demanded that I write a fiction story he'd been thinking about, and I eventually did. Then I was hooked. If you could look up that book today, you would see that it has over 900 reviews, 85% of them being 4 and 5 stars. The 2% that are 1-star ratings are instructive. The headlines read, "Stilted dialogue, I told you so," and implausible characters. One review called it sophomoric and said the author and his editor, my client did give me editorial credit, although he published my first draft. They said we should be exiled. These reviewers weren't wrong, in my opinion. If it had been sent to a traditional publisher, they would have burned it and never accepted a manuscript from us again. And yet, 85% of readers who reviewed it enjoyed it enough to write a review. And that 900 reviews represents somewhere between 22,000 and 90,000 readers, since it's estimated that only 1 to 3% of readers bother to review. My point is this: even if you feel you aren't good enough, someone is going to enjoy your book. I made every mistake an indie author could make while my client graciously paid me to learn to write. After about 20 books in 4 series, we amicably parted ways. I had learned enough to know that we weren't doing it right, even though he was enjoying a 6-figure income from it. I wanted to write better books, and that's my ego holding me back. Or you could call it wanting to take pride in my work. You can spin it however you want. As I published 8 novels under my own pen name before selling the rights to them to another client, I developed a following of about 4,000 readers who loved my books, as imperfect as they were. An outside influence, my mother's death, sent me on a new quest when fiction dried up for me. That quest saw me learning not only how to make sure a book was professionally produced, but taught me about the business aspects of a writing career, which are making sure there's a market for the book I want to write, lining up readers eager to buy even before I start writing it, how to launch it in a way that ensures a sustainable income from it, and maybe even bestseller status, and what it takes for most people to see a return on the investment of the time and money they put into a nonfiction book. Now, not everyone who writes a book wants to make money from it. Many people want to have an impact on other people's lives. I'll write fiction again because that's my passion. My heart song is comprised of a harmonious blend of more than one type of book, though. I have nonfiction, creative nonfiction, and yes, finally fiction stories to tell now. And it's the perfect time for all of them, because the perfect time is whenever the opportunity arises and you are in the right frame of mind to listen. Technology has given us unlimited opportunity. And so, with my last slide, I would like to leave you with this. As little children, we sing with gusto, and we tell our stories without self-judgment. There has never been a better time or more opportunity to send your message into the world. May you sing your heart song without reservation. Steve, I think I went through that awfully quickly. And maybe you're still on schedule. Maybe there's time for questions if there are any to be had.
There is absolutely time for questions. That was really, really informative and well done, Cheri. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have
Yes, Cheri. Yeah.
I remember I have now determined that I'm going to be self-publishing my books. I actually determined that earlier this year when I was part of a group where we were all helping a traditionally published author develop her platform and get the word out and so forth. And one of the things that I learned in that process was just how little control is given to the author in the publishing process when you are traditionally published. And for me, that's the primary reason. I left corporate America bowing to an employer, 8 years ago, and have no desire to ever go back to that, whether that be a traditional publisher or a traditional job. So I am so grateful to you for helping me to expand my understanding of self-publishing.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. I don't disrespect the decision to go with a traditional publisher if you have that opportunity. I think I know who you were talking about, and what she has said to me is, if you want respect and acclaim, publish traditionally. If you want to make money or a wider impact, self-publish. And some of the reasons for that I didn't put in my presentation, but people might want to know that some of the reasons for that are that it's now taking anywhere from 2 to 6 years to get your book out. By the time you have queried, found an agent, the agent has found a publisher, you get on their production schedule and finally get it done. So for those of us who don't feel like we have 6 years to be unheard, that's an untenable proposition. We would do much better to get our books out. And frankly, that's why I began teaching the business aspects of self-publishing, so that people wouldn't make the mistakes I did, like publishing my first draft without editing, without proofreading, with an amateurish cover. You know, those mistakes you don't need to make. People can keep you from making those mistakes. Please feel free to ask questions if you have any. I'm happy to share anything I know.
I thought it was just so interesting that, you brought that point about having the traditional publishing house dictate who was good enough. Like that was very interesting that they turned on Jane Austen.
Wasn't it? So that was during an era while they were still establishing themselves as the gatekeeper. But yeah, what a mistake that was. Maureen, I see your hand up. Can I?
You have given me a passion once again. I have wanted to publish a book for years. And I truly didn't understand when people kept saying self-publish. I'm going, well, I'm not an editor, and I write from my heart. And it's not always perfect, or you know what I mean? As an English teacher, the content and the punctuation, and I just write intuitively, and I want to share my heart song. And I love how you identified that you can do that. And Cheri, I want to work with you.
Oh, thank you.
I want you to show me how to do this.
I would be honored to do that. I don't know exactly what I'm allowed to do here, but get my gift. You will be, I think it will show you how to reach me, and send me an email. We can talk. I just saw John Newman's comment about Grant Cardone selling far more copies through his own promotions than his big publisher. One thing that I find a lot of authors who have not yet been published have a misconception about, and that is that your publisher will market your book. They will not unless you're Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. You have to be famous already for big publishers to take a risk on you, and it is a risk. They pay for everything, including editing, cover design, proofreading. It goes through about 7 passes on your editing, back and forth. There's a lot that goes into it. Marketing isn't one of them. So up to about 2 weeks ago, if that, I would not have known who Grant Cardone was. But recently, I've been binge watching Undercover Billionaire, and I love it. So I highly recommend it. You can find it on the Discovery Channel, I believe. And I'm right in the middle of his season right now, and I gotta say, he's kind of a whiner. But that's a side note. So, Maureen, I would love to work with you, and anyone else who has that desire. Beverly asked, how do you start? What are the next steps after you have written a book? My recommendation is don't wait until you have written the book to learn those steps. As Steve will be able to tell you, my recommendation is to do some groundwork before you begin to write the book. And that groundwork includes market research, asking your readers or your target audience, what do you want to know? That was part of my course. The other thing you need to start before you have finished writing your book is your author platform, because you're going to need that in order to launch your book successfully. So the next steps after you have finished your first draft are to find an editor, one of several types of editors, to help you polish your book, to help shape it into something that is professionally produced. You need my advice, you need a professional cover designer. And you need a pretty long run up to launch your book in a way that will be sustainable. There are dozens of gurus who teach you how to make your book a bestseller. Most of them are teaching a flash in the pan type of launch that gets you to bestseller status, so you get that wonderful orange flag. What they don't tell you is that if you do it their way, that orange flag is going to go away in a matter of days, if not hours. The second book that I wrote with my first ghostwriting client went to number 9 in the entire Amazon store. It was glorious. It was thrilling. And it lasted only a few hours. So, if you want to make a sustainable income or a sustainable impact with your book, there's a better way to do it to get your book as high in the ranks as it can go, whether or not that's a bestseller, and then keep it there or very close to there for weeks, months, and possibly even years. Did that answer your question, Beverly? Okay. I think we're almost at time for the end, Steve. May I turn the microphone back over to you?
You may. Thank you, Cheri. I continue to learn at your feet, and I am so grateful that you have paved the way and built that bridge from, having our story, our song locked up inside of us for 50 years or 40 years or however many years it has been, even keeping our story locked up inside for 6 years, where, the idea of not having a published, that's a big cost, not only to ourselves, but also to all those people that would benefit from what it is that we have to share with the world.
Absolutely. Think of all the people you miss prior to that. John says bestseller does not mean best written. Absolutely. Bestseller on Amazon means that you got a bunch of people to buy your book in a short period of time, and you can easily manipulate that. That's why it's a flash in the pan.
So when we are singing our heart song, I hope that we are not only creating a flash in the pan, perhaps the thought that comes to mind for me is Milli Vanilli and their flash in the pan success with music, which was followed up by a very long and I'm sure painful aftermath.
Yeah, the fall is devastating. But yeah, I think the people here are the people that you attract, Steve, because I'm in your group and I know a number of the people you attract probably have more desire for impact than necessarily for income. Although, of course, we all need to make money. And if your book will do that and have the impact too, that's even better.
Absolutely, yes.
But, a flash in the pan bestseller can't have a long impact either. It disappears into the other almost 4 million books that are on Amazon. And bestseller on the New York Times list or the USA Today list or any of those, you would be surprised how commercial that is. I know someone who hit the New York Times bestseller list with her first a traditionally published book. It cost her publisher $20,000. That is just beyond most of our ability to do. So thank you, John. That was a great observation. Steve, I'm sorry, I keep taking the microphone back.
No, that's totally fine. Absolutely. I also think about one of my favorite books for a long time was To Kill a Mockingbird. And that was a debut novel that went to the top of the charts and stayed there for a long time, rightfully so. But one of the challenges that the author Harper Lee encountered because of that was, how do you follow that amount of success up with, you know, your next book? And my intention, my hope for all of us who are learning to sing our heart song is that we create a sustainable and long career rather than just a moment in the sun.
Yeah. Those of us who, go ahead, Olivia, say that again. You broke up.
Oh, I wanted just to mention to all the attendees that, you know, all of our amazing presenters throughout the summit have offered amazing gifts. And so I'll be dropping those links in. So in case you did not grab their gift or grab their contact info, you know, it will be in the chat for you. So keep an eye out for that.
Thank you so much, excellent, Olivia. What I was about to say was that many of the books that were extremely well written showed a lot of insensitivity. And I, for one, am rethinking the books that I loved as a young person, like Gone with the Wind, like To Kill a Mockingbird. So one of the things the only thing I can think of to do to make up for all those years now is to lift my voice in support of inclusion and respect. So I wanted to say that, despite the fact that it's off subject.
Thank you. I am looking to ensure that our next guest is queuing up, and actually, so I need to, Olivia, can you reach out to her and see if she is going to be coming on soon?
Yes, I'll reach out to her.
Thank you.
I was curious to hear everyone's if they had a favorite childhood book that they can recall.
Great question. Well, one of my favorite childhood books was and is, they're the classic picture books like Millions of Cats, which comes to mind, picture books that have been around for ages. But my first probably chapter book that I really, really enjoyed was A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle. Enough so that I read just about every book that she ever published. And one of the things that's interesting about her is that it took her quite a while from when she started writing and started submitting her books to publishers. It took about 10 years of effort before her first book was published.
Stephen King had the same experience as Richard Bach. He couldn't get published. J.K. Rowling had the same experience, famously. I'm looking at the favorite books here. I read my mother's childhood books, The Little Washingtons, The Boxcar Children. I can't recall a lot of other ones, but a children's book that I became aware of as a library assistant in my youth was, I think it was Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Year.
Mm.
day rather. I have appropriated that phrase. That's where the year came from. I had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad year that stopped me from writing fiction. But I loved that book because everything bad happened to him. So, oh, The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince, yes. Aesop's Fables.
I also loved one of the books that, similar to you, Cheri, with the horrible, terrible, etc., was the book That's Good, That's Bad, where a person has all these things happen to them, and it invariably goes from that's good, no, that's bad, and then from that's bad to that's good. And so it really cemented for me the idea that, you know, it's all in how we look at it. You know, if we look at what we're dealing with as being terrible, then it likely is going to show up as being terrible for us. And if we look at things as being positive, and the opportunities we have to grow and develop and transform into something even better, then oftentimes we see that. I'm also with, I loved and continue to love Roald Dahl's books. And like Nancy said in the comments, Harold and the Purple Crayon, I love that whole idea of being able to create the story that we want to be creating, and look at story really as that process of what is the story that I want to be creating in order to get from where I am to where I want to be. It's been a very powerful tool for me.
I see Elizabeth. She's your next speaker, am I correct?
You are correct.
So I will totally relinquish the microphone and allow you to get this segment stopped and restarted in time for Elizabeth.
Excellent. Thank you, Cheri. So I will stop the recording.